Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Naruto married to tsuande. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sun hung low over the bustling expanse of Konohagakure, casting long, golden shadows across the village that had, over the past 5 years, transformed from a war-torn crater into a sprawling metropolis. Glass gleamed from newly constructed high-rises, mingling with the traditional terracotta roofs of the older districts. The thunder trains hissed and clattered along the perimeter, a testament to the era of peace and unprecedented technological advancement ushered in following the Fourth Great Ninja War. At the very heart of this flourishing empire of leaves stood the Hokage monument, and sitting within the circular office beneath those great stone faces was the architect of this new era, the 7th Hokage, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto was 22 years old, though the heavy, velvet Hokage cloak draped over the back of his chair made him look older. The boundless, chaotic energy that had defined his youth was still there, simmering just beneath the surface. But it had been tempered by the crushing, relentless weight of leadership. He rubbed his eyes, his fingers pressing into the dark bags that had become a permanent fixture on his face. Before him lay a mountain of paperwork, trade agreements with the Sand Village, budget allocations for the newly formed scientific ninja weapons team, and petty land disputes between the nobles of the Land of Fire. If I had known, Naruto muttered to the empty room, his voice raspy from disuse, that becoming Hokage meant fighting an endless war against paper, I might have let Sasuke have the job. He reached out blindly for his cup of instant ramen, only to find the broth had gone stone cold an hour ago. He sighed, leaning back in his chair until it squeaked in protest. The ceiling of the office offered no answers, only the familiar, spiraling grain of the wood. The door to the office clicked open, saving him from his spiraling thoughts. Shikamaru Nara stepped inside, a manila folder tucked under his arm. The Nara heir looked just as exhausted as Naruto, his hair pulled back into its signature spiky ponytail, a lit cigarette dangling precariously from his lips despite the no-smoking signs Naruto had jokingly put up last year. Talking to yourself again, Lord Seventh? Shikamaru drawled, his tone dry but laced with underlying affection. Don't call me that when it's just us, Shikamaru, Naruto groaned, dragging his hands down his face. Please tell me you're here to say the daimyo's emissaries got lost on the way here, or that their carriage broke down, or that a very specific, non-lethal localized hurricane swept them back to the capital. Shikamaru chuckled, walking over to the desk and dropping the heavy folder onto the wooden surface with a loud, ominous thud. No such luck. They arrived 20 minutes ago. Koharu and Hamura are already entertaining them in the council chambers. You're expected in 10 minutes. Naruto winced at the mention of the two village elders. Koharu Udatain and Hamura Mitokado were relics of a bygone era, surviving members of the second Hokage's team. Despite the generational shift, they still clung to their seats of power like barnacles to a ship's hull. Naruto respected their experience, but their cold, calculating approach to village politics always set his teeth on edge. What do they want this time? Naruto asked, sitting forward and lacing his fingers together. The budget for the academy expansion was approved last week. The daimyos signed off on the new trade routes. The village is peaceful. The alliance is strong. What could possibly be so urgent that the daimyo sends his personal lapdogs all the way from the capital? Shikamaru's expression darkened. He took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaling a thin plume of gray smoke toward the ceiling. I don't know, Naruto. And that's what bothers me. I tried to press the emissary, Lord Ikemoto, for an agenda, but he completely stonewalled me. Koharu and Hamura have been unusually tight-lipped as well. They've been holding closed-door meetings for the past 3 days. Whatever this is, it's big. And it's highly political. Naruto stood up, stretching his arms above his head until his spine popped in a series of satisfying cracks. He grabbed his white and red Hokage cloak, swinging it over his shoulders with a practiced motion. The kanji 47 rippled on his back. Well, Naruto said, his blue eyes hardening into the resolute stare that had brought the world to its knees during the war. Let's go face the music. We survived Madara Uchiha and Kagaya Otsutsuki. A few stuffy politicians shouldn't be a problem. Shikamaru didn't smile. Just remember, Naruto, Battles are fought with ninjutsu. Wars are fought with politics. And politics is a game where the rules change while you're playing. Across the village, in a high-end tavern situated in the affluent merchant district, Tsunade Senju slammed a small ceramic sake cup onto the wooden table. "Another!" she roared, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the establishment. The terrified bartender scrambled to fill a fresh carafe, rushing it over to her table with trembling hands. Tsunade, the legendary Sannin and the fifth Hokage, looked exactly as she had over a decade ago. Her blonde hair fell in two loose ponytails, framing a face unmarred by time. The diamond-shaped strength of 100 CO rested dormant on her forehead, a testament to her mastery over chakra and cellular regeneration. Chronologically, she was well into her late 60s, but the world saw a woman in her absolute prime. Yet beneath the youthful facade, Tsunade felt every single year of her age. The war had taken a massive toll on her, both physically and emotionally. When she had finally passed the hat to Kakashi, and subsequently watched Naruto take the mantle, she had believed her duty to the Leaf Village was finally fulfilled. She had given them her youth, her blood, her tears, and her heart. Now she just wanted to be left alone to her vices. She picked up the carafe, bypassing the tiny cup entirely, and took a long, burning swig directly from the bottle. "You're going to drink the place dry, Lady Tsunade," a soft voice admonished. Tsunade didn't bother looking up as Shizen slid into the booth opposite her. Her longtime assistant and confidant looked exasperated, cradling the small pig, Tantan, in her arms. "That's the plan, Shizen," Tsunade slurred slightly, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Besides, I won big at the parlor today. Swept the roulette table 3 times in a row." Shizen paled. Tantan let out an anxious oink. You won?" Shizen stammered, her eyes darting nervously around the tavern as if expecting the roof to cave in. Tsunade's luck was legendary for being atrocious. Whenever the Slug Princess won at gambling, it was a universally acknowledged sign that something terrible was about to happen. A catastrophe of epic proportions. "Don't look at me like that," Tsunade grumbled, though a flicker of unease gnawed at her own stomach. "Maybe my luck has just finally turned around. I'm a retired woman. I deserve some good fortune, Lady Tsunade." Shizen hesitated, biting her lower lip. "I'm not here just to check on your bar tab. An Umbu messenger found me at the hospital." "You've been summoned." Tsunade narrowed her honey-brown eyes. "Summoned? By whom?" "Kakashi is probably reading his smut at the hot springs, and Naruto knows better than to bother me unless the village is literally on fire." "It's the village council," Shizen said, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. "Elders Koharu and Hamura, and the Fire Daimyo's personal emissaries are present. They specifically requested your presence in the central council chambers immediately." Tsunade scoffed, slamming the empty carafe down. "Tell them to go to hell. I'm retired. I don't answer to the council anymore, and I certainly don't care about whatever petty squabble the daimyo is having with his concubines. Let the brat handle it. He's the Hokage now." "They said it was a matter of utmost national security," Shizen pressed, her tone laced with genuine anxiety. "And they said if you refuse to attend, it will be considered an act of treason against the Land of Fire." The tavern seemed to drop in temperature. Tsunade's chakra flared, a terrifying, suffocating pressure that made the wooden floorboards creak and the nearby patrons gasp for air. Shizen flinched, but held her ground. "Treason?" Tsunade whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She slowly stood up, tossing a thick wad of Rio onto the table. Her buzz evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, familiar fury. The elders dared to threaten her? After everything she had sacrificed? "Fine," Tsunade hissed, adjusting her green haori. "Let's go see what those 2 mummified fossils want. But if this is a waste of my time, I'm dismantling the council chambers with my bare hands." The central council chamber was a large, semicircular room located deep within the Hokage Tower, designed for maximum acoustics and maximum intimidation. The walls were lined with the banners of the great noble houses of the Leaf, but the centerpiece was a massive, crescent-shaped mahogany table. When Naruto entered, flanked by Shikamaru, the tension in the room was so thick it could be cut with a kunai. Sitting at the center of the table was Lord Ikemoto, the daimyo's emissary. He was a plump, heavily powdered man adorned in excessive silk robes of crimson and gold, fluttering an ornate folding fan in front of his face. To his left and right sat Koharu and Hamura, their faces wrinkled maps of stoic, unreadable judgment. Several Umbu guards stood in the shadows, silent as ghosts. Lord 7th, Ikemoto greeted, his voice a reedy, nasal whine that instantly irritated Naruto. He didn't stand up. A blatant sign of disrespect. So glad you could finally join us. Naruto took his seat opposite the emissary, keeping his expression neutral. Lord Ikemoto. Elders. I was under the impression the village's current ledgers were perfectly balanced. To what do I owe the pleasure of this unscheduled visit? Hamura cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. This is not a matter of ledgers, Naruto. This is a matter concerning the long-term survival and structural integrity of Konohagakure. Before Naruto could respond to the elder's cryptic statement, the heavy oak doors of the chamber swung open with enough force to crack the hinges. Tsunade strode into the room, her boots clicking sharply against the polished stone floor. Her face was set in a terrifying scowl. All right, let's get this over with, Tsunade barked, crossing her arms over her chest as she came to stand next to Naruto's chair. She didn't bother sitting down. She glared directly at the two elders. You threw the word treason at my assistant. You have exactly 1 minute to explain yourselves before I show you exactly how strong my punch still is. Lady Tsunade, Koharu said, completely unfazed by the threat. Your presence was mandatory because the matter at hand involves you directly. Please take a seat. Tsunade glared, but seeing the genuine confusion and mild panic in Naruto's eyes, she sighed and sank into the chair to his right. Now that we are all gathered, Lord Ikemoto began, snapping his fan shut. Let us dispense with the pleasantries. Lord 7th, under your leadership, Konoha has experienced a renaissance. Trade is booming, the military is resting, and the technological advancements are staggering. The daimyo is pleased. I sense a but coming, Naruto said, leaning forward. But, Ikemoto continued smoothly, prosperity breeds jealousy. And peace, as you shinobi should know, is a fragile, fleeting illusion. The Fourth Shinobi War destroyed the old world order. The alliance between the 5 great nations holds for now, primarily due to your personal relationships with the other Kage. However, the daimyo's court is deeply concerned about the future. We have a peace treaty, Naruto argued, his brow furrowing. Gaara, Darui, Chojuro, Kuratsuchi, they are my friends. We shed blood together. We aren't going to turn on each other. Friendship is not a political strategy, Lord 7th, Koharu interjected coldly. Friendships die. People change. What happens in 20 years? What happens when a new Reikage or a new Tsuchikage takes power? The Fire Daimyo is pouring billions of ryo into Konoha's infrastructure. He views this village as his primary asset. And right now, that asset is secured by nothing more than the sentimental feelings of a 22-year-old boy. Naruto slammed his hands on the table, half rising from his seat. I am not a boy. I am the Hokage. And I won't let you sit here and insult the bonds that saved this world. Sit down, Naruto, Tsunade ordered softly, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Naruto looked at her, saw the serious, calculating glint in her eyes, and slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Tsunade looked back to the emissary. Get to the point, Ikemoto. What does the daimyo want? Hostages? More Umbu stationed at the capital? A larger cut of the trade tariffs? The daimyo desires none of those things, Ikemoto said, a sly, serpentine smile stretching across his powdered face. He desires an absolute, undeniable symbol of power, a bedrock of stability that will signal to the other great nations, and to any internal dissenting factions, that Konohagakure is, and always will be, untouchable. Hamura took over, his gravelly voice echoing in the chamber. Historically, stability in our village has been tied to the founding clans. The Uchiha are all but gone, reduced to a single wandering rogue. The Senju clan, the true founders of the Leaf, is reduced to a single living member. He gestured vaguely toward Tsunade. And the Uzumaki clan, our ancient sister clan, is represented solely by our current Hokage. Naruto blinked, a sense of dread pooling in his stomach. He looked at Shikamaru, who was staring intently at the table, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. Shikamaru had already figured it out. Throughout history, Kohara continued, the strongest political alliances were forged not through treaties of paper, but through blood. The daimyo and the village council have come to a unanimous decision regarding the future of Konoha. Spit it out, Koharu! Tsunade snapped, her patience completely evaporated. Kohara met Tsunade's furious gaze without blinking. To secure the continued financial backing of the Fire Daimyo, and to solidify the absolute power of the Hokage seat, the Senju and Uzumaki bloodlines must be united. Silence fell over the room. A thick, suffocating silence. Naruto stared at Koharu, his brain struggling to process the words. Uniting the bloodlines? What did that even mean? He looked at Tsunade, then back to the elders. I don't understand, Naruto said, his voice dropping an octave. Are you saying you want me to, what? Start a clan restoration act? Bring in distant relatives? Don't be obtuse, Naruto, Hamura said sharply. There are no distant relatives. There is only you. And there is only Lady Tsunade. The words hung in the air, a grotesque, impossible puzzle piece. You want to formally ally my office with Tsunade's legacy? Naruto asked, still desperately grasping at political jargon to avoid the horrific conclusion his mind was hurtling toward. We already do that. She's the 5th, I'm the 7th. No, you idiot, Tsunade whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried a tremor that Naruto had never heard before. Not when she was impaled by Madara, not when the village was destroyed by pain. Tsunade stood up slowly, her hands trembling as they braced against the mahogany table. She glared at Koharu and Hamura with a hatred so pure and venomous it made the umbu in the shadows shift uncomfortably. You are out of your goddamn minds, Tsunade said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. It is the decree of the daimyo, Tsunade, Kohara said, her tone unyielding. Naruto Uzumaki and Tsunade Senju are to be married. Immediately. You will unite the founding bloodlines, producing an heir that will serve as the ultimate deterrent to any nation that would dare threaten the leaf. The words struck Naruto like a physical blow. The air rushed out of his lungs. He felt physically violently ill, the room spinning around him. Married? Naruto choked out, his voice cracking. He looked at Tsunade, the woman who had kissed his forehead when he was a genin, the woman who had fought beside Jiraiya, the woman he viewed as a strange amalgamation of a mentor, a commander, and a grandmother. Married to Grandma Tsunade? Are you insane? Watch your tone, Lord 7th, Ikemoto warned, his fan snapping open again. Screw my tone! Naruto roared, his chakra violently erupting. The golden aura of Kurama flickered around his body, the sheer force of it cracking the wood beneath his hands and blowing Ikemoto's fan right out of his grip. She's family. She's decades older than me. She was in love with Dan. She was Jiraiya's teammate. This is sick. It's a joke. Tell me this is a sick joke, Shikamaru. Shikamaru didn't look up. Naruto, please. Calm your chakra. Do not tell me to calm down. Naruto yelled, turning his blazing blue eyes on the elders. I am the Hokage. I make the decisions here. And I say absolutely, unequivocally, no, I will not disrespect Tsunade like this, and I will not be used as a breeding horse for the daimyo's political games. Tsunade, however, did not yell. Her chakra did not flare. Instead, she looked incredibly small. Koharu, Tsunade said, her voice terrifyingly quiet. I am nearly 70 years old. Your body is preserved in perfect stasis, Tsunade, Hamura countered clinically. Your medical records indicate you are entirely capable of bearing children. Your cellular structure is that of a woman in her late 20s. It is not about my cells. Tsunade slammed her fist into the table. The reinforced mahogany splintered and cracked under her knuckles, a massive fissure running down the center of the wood. Lord Ikemoto shrieked and scrambled backward in his chair. It is about my soul. It is about my life. I gave this village my brother. I gave this village my lover. I gave this village my youth, my blood, and my sanity. And you sit here, you rotting corpses, and demand that I give you my body as well? To marry a boy who is young enough to be my grandson, It is a sacrifice for the greater good, Kohara said, refusing to back down. Something a Hokage should understand. He has his whole life ahead of him. Tsunade yelled, gesturing wildly at Naruto, who was staring at her with wide, horrified eyes. He loves that Hyuga girl. Or the Haruno girl. Let him marry someone his own age. Let him have a normal life. He saved the entire world, Koharu. Does he not deserve a shred of happiness? Happiness is a luxury shinobi cannot afford, Hamura said coldly. We are tools of the village. Both of you swore oaths to protect Konoha at all costs. This is the cost. I won't do it, Naruto said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. The Kurama chakra faded, but the intensity in his eyes remained. He stepped out from behind the desk, standing shoulder to shoulder with Tsunade. If the daimyo wants a symbol of power, I will march to the capital and show him exactly how powerful I am, but I will not force Tsunade into a sham marriage. The answer is no. Meeting adjourned. He grabbed Tsunade's arm gently, intending to lead her out of the chamber. If you walk out that door, Lord Seventh, Ikemoto's reedy voice echoed, trembling slightly but laced with a lethal smugness, the fire daimyo will immediately sever all funding to Konohagakure. Naruto stopped dead in his tracks. Tsunade stiffened beside him. Every Ryo, Ikemoto continued, standing up and brushing the dust from his silk robes. The academy expansion? Cancelled. The hospital renovations? Halted. The pensions for the war widows and orphans? Gone. The Leaf Village will be bankrupt by the end of the month. Naruto turned around slowly. You're bluffing. The daimyo wouldn't risk crippling his own military force. We are at peace, Lord Seventh, Ikemoto smiled thinly. The daimyo does not need a massive military force right now. He can afford to starve you out. He will simply divert the funds to the guardian ninja at the capital. Within a year, your people will be starving. Poverty will breed crime. Your beautiful, rebuilt village will tear itself apart from the inside. And when the other nations see your weakness, do you truly believe your friendships with the other Kage will stop their hidden councils from taking advantage of a crippled Leaf Village? Naruto's breath hitched. He saw flashes of the village in his mind, the smiling children running through the new parks, the bustling markets, the academy's students learning in safe, clean environments. He saw the faces of the war orphans who relied on the village stipends just to eat. You're holding the entire village hostage, Naruto whispered, absolute disgust dripping from his words. Over a marriage? Over control? Shikamaru finally spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. He looked up at Naruto, his dark eyes filled with apologies. Naruto. I spent all night analyzing this from every angle. If they cut the funding, the village collapses. We don't have the agricultural or industrial independence yet to survive without the daimyo's backing. It's a checkmate. There is always another way. Naruto insisted, though desperation was creeping into his voice. I can take missions. High-ranking bounties. I can raise the money myself. You are the Hokage, Hamura snapped. You cannot abandon your desk to play bounty hunter. Furthermore, no amount of missions can equate to the billions of Ryo required to sustain a village of this magnitude. This is not a debate, Naruto Uzumaki. This is an ultimatum. Koharu stood up, her aged joints popping in the quiet room. You have exactly 1 week to publicly announce your engagement. The wedding will take place within the month. If you refuse, the decree of defunding will be signed by the daimyo. The blood of this village's ruin will be on your hands. The elders turned and walked toward the exit, their footsteps echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock. Lord Ikemoto offered a mocking bow before following them out, flanked by the silent Umbu. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, leaving Naruto, Tsunade, and Shikamaru alone in the ruined council chamber. The silence was deafening. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as the gravity of the ultimatum crushed the breath from their lungs. Naruto stood frozen, his hands curled into tight fists at his sides. He had fought gods. He had fought monsters of unfathomable power. He had broken curses of hatred that spanned centuries. But standing here in this quiet room, he felt completely, utterly powerless. How could he fight a war where the enemy was the ledger, and the hostage was the livelihood of every man, woman, and child he had sworn to protect? He looked over at Tsunade, The fifth Hokage had collapsed back into her chair. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently, though she made no sound. The illusion of the invincible slug princess, the legendary Sannin, seemed to shatter before his eyes. She looked small. She looked defeated. She looked like a woman who had spent her entire life running from ghosts, only to find them waiting for her at the finish line. "Tsunade," Naruto whispered, taking a tentative step toward her. He reached out a hand, wanting to comfort her, wanting to tell her that he would fix this, that he would find a way. "Don't," Tsunade gasped, her voice thick and wet. She didn't look up. She threw her hand out, swatting his hand away before he could touch her. "Just don't touch me right now, Naruto. Please." Naruto retracted his hand as if he had been burned. A lump the size of a boulder formed in his throat. Shikamaru slowly stood up, gathering the files from the table. He didn't look at either of them. I'll go review the budget again. See if there are any loopholes in the daimyo's charter." "But Naruto..." Shikamaru paused at the door, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. "Prepare yourself." They weren't bluffing. The door clicked shut, leaving Naruto alone with the woman he was apparently destined to marry. Naruto walked slowly toward the large window at the back of the chamber, looking out over the village he loved more than life itself. The sun had finally set, and the village was coming alive with a million glittering lights. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, and the price to keep it that way was the freedom of the only two people who had given everything to build it. "I'm sorry," Naruto said softly to the glass, watching the reflection of the blonde woman sitting broken at the table behind him. "I'm so sorry, Grandma Tsunade." Tsunade lowered her hands, revealing eyes that were red and rimmed with unshed tears. She looked at Naruto's broad back, wrapped in the cloak that she had once worn, the cloak that had cost her so much. She saw the boy who had brought her back from the abyss, now a man, standing on the precipice of his own. "It's not your fault, kid," Tsunade whispered into the quiet darkness of the room. Her voice was devoid of anger now, hollowed out by a profound, agonizing resignation. "It's just the curse of the Hokage. We don't get to belong to ourselves." She stood up, her joints aching despite the seal on her forehead, and walked toward the door. She didn't look back. "1 week, Tsunade said, her hand resting on the brass doorknob. "We have 1 week to figure out how to destroy our own lives so this village can live." The door opened and closed, leaving Naruto utterly alone in the dark. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window, staring down at the glowing streets of Konoha. For the first time since he was a lonely, ostracized child sitting on the village swing, Naruto Uzumaki closed his eyes and wished he had never wanted to be Hokage at all. The sky above Konohagakure had turned the color of bruised iron. The oppressive humidity that usually preceded a torrential summer downpour clung to the village, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. For Naruto Uzumaki, sitting on the edge of the Hokage monument directly atop his own carved stone head, the weather was a perfect mirror for the suffocating weight sitting on his chest. It had been 48 hours since the daimyo's ultimatum. 2 days of frantic closed-door meetings, endless budget reviews with Shikamaru, and desperate missives sent to the capital that went entirely ignored. The verdict remained absolute: marry Tsunade Senju, or watch the Leaf Village starve. Naruto stared down at the sprawling metropolis. From up here, the people looked like tiny, insignificant ants, scurrying along the paved roads, blissfully unaware that their entire livelihood was currently resting on a grotesque political chessboard. He could see the academy in the distance, the new hospital wing Tsunade had designed, and the bustling merchant district where families were buying groceries for dinner. He had promised to protect them. He had promised to be a Hokage that surpassed all the others. But what did that mean, really? "You're going to catch a cold up here, Naruto." Naruto didn't turn around. He recognized the gentle, slightly scolding tone immediately. Irika Yumino climbed the last few steps of the maintenance scaffolding and stepped onto the stone monument, his hands tucked into the pockets of his standard Jonin flak jacket. Irika looked older now, the faint lines around his eyes deepening, but his warm, compassionate presence remained entirely unchanged. "Shinobi don't catch colds from a little wind, Irika-sensei," Naruto replied, his voice uncharacteristically flat. Irika walked over and sat down beside him, dangling his legs over the massive stone forehead. He followed Naruto's gaze down to the village. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind howled past them, whipping Naruto's blonde hair around his face and snapping the fabric of his cloak. Shikamaru told me, Iruka finally said, his voice dropping to a somber whisper. He came to my apartment last night. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He explained the situation. Naruto let out a hollow, bitter laugh. The situation. That's a polite way of saying the daimyo is holding a kunai to the village's throat and demanding I sell my soul to make him put it down. Iruka flinched, the words striking him like a physical blow. He looked at his former student, the boy who had painted the Hokage faces, the boy who had screamed his dream to anyone who would listen, the hero who had bled to save the world. Iruka felt a profound, sickening wave of failure wash over him. Naruto. I don't even know what to say. It's barbaric. It's a relic of the Warring States period. Forced political marriages. We're supposed to be past this. We aren't past anything, Sensei, Naruto said, pulling his knees to his chest and resting his chin on them, looking remarkably like the lonely 12-year-old boy he used to be. The wars just changed. Before, we fought with jutsu on the battlefield. Now, they fight with ledgers and treaties behind closed doors. And the worst part? The worst part is that I can't punch a ledger. I can't throw a raisin shuriken at a budget deficit. Naruto turned his head, his brilliant blue eyes clouded with an exhaustion so deep it terrified Iruka. I spent my whole life fighting for the freedom to choose my own destiny. To change my fate. And now, the very dream I fought for is the cage locking me in. If I say no, the village loses its funding. Shikamaru ran the numbers 100 times. Without the daimyo, we can't pay the umbu. We can't fund the hospital. The orphans. Naruto choked on the word, his throat tightening. The orphanage funding gets cut first. I can't let that happen. I won't let another generation of kids grow up hungry and alone like I did. Iruka reached out, placing a trembling hand on Naruto's shoulder. He wanted to tell him to run, to tell him to take the girl he truly loved, whether it was Hinata, or Sakura, or anyone else, and leave this cursed system behind. But Iruka knew Naruto. He knew the will of fire burned so brightly in this young man that it would eventually consume him. Naruto, Iruka said softly, tears prickling the corners of his eyes. You have given this village everything. You gave us your childhood. You gave us your blood. You don't have to give us your future too. If I don't, who will? Naruto asked, his voice cracking. He looked back down at the village. I'm the Hokage, Iruka-sensei. The village is my family. All of them. If protecting them means I have to marry her, then I'll do it. Iruka squeezed his shoulder, a single tear escaping and tracking down his scarred nose. And what about Lady Tsunade? Have you spoken to her since the council meeting? No, Naruto whispered, looking away. She hasn't been home. She hasn't been to the hospital. The umbu said they lost track of her last night. I think she hates me for this. Or she hates the village. I don't know which is worse. She could never hate you. A new voice drawled from the shadows behind them. Naruto and Iruka turned to see Kakashi Hatake leaning against the railing of the scaffolding, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets, his single visible eye curved in a melancholic expression. He wore civilian clothes, having happily discarded the Hokage robes years ago, but the aura of authority still clung to him. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto muttered, sitting up a little straighter. Kakashi walked over, nodding respectfully to Iruka before looking down at Naruto. Iruka is right about one thing, Naruto. Tsunade doesn't hate you, but she is intimately familiar with the teeth of the monster you're currently wrestling with. The monster? Naruto asked. The hat, Kakashi replied, pointing a lazy finger at the Hokage rock beneath them. The seat of the Hokage. It's a beautiful dream from the outside, Naruto. But from the inside, it's a meat grinder. It takes everything you love, everything you want, and demands you sacrifice it on the altar of the greater good. The third gave his life. The fourth gave his life and his newborn son. I gave my peace of mind. And Tsunade. Kakashi sighed, looking up at the gray sky. Tsunade gave the only things she had left. her freedom and her sanity. And now, the village is asking for the rest. What am I supposed to do, Kakashi-sensei? Naruto pleaded, desperation bleeding into his voice. Shikamaru says there's no way around the daimyo's decree. The elders are perfectly fine with blackmailing us. I feel like I'm drowning, and I'm dragging Grandma Tsunade down with me. Kakashi dropped down into a crouch so he was eye level with his former student. The laid-back, aloof demeanor was completely gone, replaced by the deadly serious gaze of a veteran commander. You stop looking at this like a boy who got caught in a trap, and you start looking at it like the man who leads this village, Kakashi said firmly. The daimyo wants a political theater? Fine, give him a theater. But do not let them break you, and do not let them break her. Tsunade is proud. She is a senju. The idea of being forced into a marriage to appease a fat bureaucrat in the capital is tearing her apart, not because she dislikes you, but because it violates her autonomy. She spent decades running from the village's control, only to be chained back down to it. So, I just accept it? Naruto asked, his fists clenching on his knees. You accept the reality of the battlefield, yes, Kakashi said. But you control the terms of engagement. You and Tsunade are the two strongest shinobi on the planet. If you have to do this, you do it on your terms. You go find her, Naruto. Not as the Hokage summoning a subordinate. Not as a kid looking for his grandmother. You go to her as an equal, as a partner sharing a burden that no one else in this village can possibly understand. Kakashi stood up, the first heavy drops of rain beginning to fall from the bruised sky, spotting the dry stone around them. The village is a heavy burden, Naruto, Kakashi said softly over his shoulder as he turned to leave. It's too heavy for one person. Even for you. Maybe the daimyo accidentally did you both a favor, because neither of you was ever going to ask for help carrying it. Naruto watched Kakashi disappear down the stairs, the older man's words echoing in his mind. The rain began to fall harder, quickly turning into a deluge that soaked through his cloak. Iruka stood up, shivering slightly. I have to get back to the academy, Iruka said, looking down at Naruto with immense sorrow. Are you going to be alright, Naruto? Naruto took a deep breath, the cold rain washing away the paralyzing fog of panic that had clouded his mind for the past 2 days. He stood up, shaking the water from his blonde hair. His eyes, though still lined with exhaustion, burned with a renewed, stubborn resolve. Yeah, Iruka-sensei, Naruto said, his voice steadying. I know what I have to do now. The Konoha cemetery was a sprawling sea of gray stone, slick and gleaming under the heavy downpour. The rain fell in sheets, masking the sound of footsteps and washing the mud over the paths. At the far edge of the cemetery, near the perimeter fence where the old, ancient trees stood guard, a solitary figure stood motionless before 3 graves. Tsunade Senju did not carry an umbrella. Her green hiyori was plastered to her back, and her blonde hair hung in heavy, wet strands around her face. She held a large ceramic jug of premium sake in her left hand, the seal already broken. She stared at the 3 stones, Nawaki Senju, Dan Kato, Jiraiya the Gallant. A memorial stone, empty beneath the earth, but heavy with memories. I must be the biggest joke in the universe, Tsunade said aloud, her voice raspy. She tipped the jug forward, pouring a generous splash of the clear alcohol over the base of Nawaki's headstone, then Dan's, and finally Jiraiya's. She brought the heavy jug to her own lips and drank deeply, ignoring the burn as the alcohol slid down her throat, mixing with the cold rainwater dripping from her face. You'd laugh your ass off, wouldn't you, Jiraiya? Tsunade muttered, her lips pulling into a bitter, broken smile. The great Tsunade. The slug princess. Forced into an arranged marriage like a helpless little Fuga heiress. And to your godson, no less. You're probably howling with laughter down in hell. She took another drink, her vision swimming slightly. She had been drinking for 2 days straight, bouncing from obscure tavern to obscure tavern, using her chakra to rapidly burn the alcohol out of her system just so she could drink more and feel the numbness all over again. She stepped closer to Dan's grave, reaching out to trace the engraved kanji of his name with a trembling, pale finger. I'm sorry, Dan, she whispered, a sob finally tearing free from her chest. I'm so sorry. I thought, when the war ended, I thought my debt was paid. I thought I could just fade away quietly and wait for my time to come join you. But they won't let me go. The village, it's a parasite, Dan. It feeds on the senju. It took my grandfather, my granduncle, it took Nawaki, it took you, and now it wants the very last piece of my soul. She leaned her forehead against the cold, wet stone of Dan's grave. The rain masked her tears, but her shoulders heaved with decades of repressed grief. The idea of standing at an altar, pledging herself to someone else, felt like a vile betrayal. It felt like she was killing Dan all over again, and Naruto. God, the thought of Naruto made her stomach churn with guilt. He was so bright, so full of life and naive optimism. He looked at her with such pure, familial affection. The thought of tarnishing his brilliant future with her cursed, rotting existence was abhorrent. She was a relic. She was a woman who used the jutsu to hide the deep wrinkles and decaying cells of her true age. What right did she have to bind the sun to a corpse? I can't do it, Tsunade sobbed into the stone. I can't let them do this to him. He deserves a wife who can give him a family, a future, not a broken old woman. She pushed herself away from the grave, her legs unsteady. She took one last, long swig from the jug, emptying it completely. She let the ceramic vessel slip from her fingers, shattering into dozens of sharp pieces against the stone pathway. She turned away from the graves of the men she loved, wrapping her wet haori tighter around herself, and walked out of the cemetery like a ghost haunting her own life. The Toad's Belly was a tavern that lived up to its name. Located in the lowest, poorest tier of the village, it was a damp, dimly lit establishment that smelled sharply of stale beer, wet dog, and cheap tobacco. It was a place where off-duty umbu, disgraced merchants, and people who wanted to disappear went to drown their sorrows. There were no bright lanterns, no cheerful music, and certainly no fire daimyo emissaries. Tsunade sat in the darkest corner booth, nursing her fourth bottle of something that tasted suspiciously like rubbing alcohol. The barkeep, a massive man with a scarred face, knew exactly who she was, but he also knew better than to say a single word. He just kept leaving bottles on her table and retreating to safety. The door to the tavern creaked open, letting in a gust of cold wind and rain. Tsunade didn't look up, too focused on the chipped grain of the wooden table. It wasn't until a figure slid into the booth opposite her, blocking the dim candlelight, that she finally raised her heavy eyes. Naruto sat across from her. He was soaked to the bone, his Hokage cloak plastered to his shoulders, dripping water onto the floor. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like the boisterous, loud-mouthed kid she had dragged back to the village all those years ago. He looked incredibly, impossibly exhausted. For a long minute, neither of them said anything. The only sound in the tavern was the low hum of conversation from the other patrons, and the steady drumming of the rain against the roof. Naruto reached out, took the bottle of cheap sake from Tsunade's loose grip, and picked up a clean cup that the barkeep had wisely left on the table. He poured the cup to the brim. Tsunade watched him, her eyes narrowing. "You don't drink, brat." "I'm not a brat anymore," Naruto said quietly. He picked up the cup, closed his eyes, and threw it back. He coughed violently as the cheap alcohol burned a trail of fire down his throat, his eyes watering. He slammed the cup down, wiping his mouth with his wet sleeve. "God, that's disgusting. How do you drink this poison?" Tsunade stared at him, a flicker of something, maybe amusement, maybe profound sorrow, passing over her face. "It's supposed to be disgusting. If it tasted good, you'd drink it for pleasure. This is medicine." She pulled the bottle back across the table and drank directly from it. "I've been looking for you for 2 days, Tsunade," Naruto said, leaning his elbows on the table and lacing his fingers together. He didn't call her grandma. He didn't use an honorific. The subtle shift in his vocabulary hit Tsunade harder than a physical blow. "Well, you found me," Tsunade slurred slightly, resting her chin on her hand. "Here I am, Lord Seventh. Awaiting my orders. Have you come to drag me to the altar by my hair to appease the council?" Naruto flinched, the words cutting deep, but he held her gaze. Shikamaru checked the ledgers. He checked the treaties. He even contacted the Sand Village to see if Gaara could float us a loan to bypass the daimyo entirely. Tsunade's eyes sharpened slightly, the haze of alcohol burning away at the mention of village logistics. "And? Gaara offered us everything he had, Naruto said, his voice thick with gratitude and regret. But the sand is still rebuilding from the war, too. It wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't even cover the Leaf's operating costs for 3 months. If the daimyo cuts us off, we lose the village, Tsunade. The hospital shuts down. The academy closes. The food imports stop. Tsunade closed her eyes, her head falling back against the wooden booth. A shaky breath rattled in her chest. Checkmate, checkmate, Naruto agreed softly. Tsunade let out a dry, bitter chuckle that sounded like grinding stones. They got me. The bastards finally got me. 50 years of running, of fighting, of bleeding for this village, and they finally found the one chain I can't break. She opened her eyes, fixing Naruto with a stare of utter devastation. I'm sorry, Naruto. Naruto blinked, caught off guard. You're sorry? For what? For ruining your life, Tsunade spat, gesturing vaguely between them. Look at me, Naruto. Really look at me. I am an old woman. The only reason I don't look like Chio is because of a chakra seal on my forehead. I am decades older than you. I have more ghosts in my head than there are in the memorial stone. You are 22. You should be marrying a girl who can make you laugh. Who can give you the big, loud family you always wanted. You shouldn't be chained to a cursed, broken relic like me. Naruto stared at her. He saw the genuine self-loathing in her eyes, the deep-seated trauma that she usually hid behind a mask of anger and bravado. He realized, in that moment, that Kakashi was right. Tsunade wasn't rejecting him. She was trying to protect him. Naruto reached across the table. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed Tsunade's hand, her cold, trembling hand, and held it firmly in his own warm grip. Tsunade gasped softly, trying to pull away, but Naruto held on. Stop it, Naruto said, his voice firm, commanding, and laced with a deep, rumbling authority that commanded her attention. Stop talking about yourself like that. You are Tsunade Senju. You are the 5th Hokage. You saved my life. You saved this village more times than I can count. You aren't a relic. You are a hero. Tsunade looked at their joined hands, her lip trembling. I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is fair, Naruto continued, his voice softening. It's not. It's cruel, and it's disgusting, and I hate the daimyo and the elders for forcing us into this. But I'll be damned if I sit here and let you convince yourself that you are some kind of burden to me. Naruto, listen to me, Tsunade. Naruto squeezed her hand. Do you remember when I first became Hokage? When I was drowning in the paperwork, and I realized how lonely that office is. I came to your house. You poured me tea, and you sat with me for 3 hours, and you didn't say a word while I cried because the pressure was too much. Tsunade nodded slowly. She remembered. She had seen the boy breaking under the weight of the crown, and her heart had ached for him. Nobody else understands what it's like, Naruto said, looking directly into her amber eyes. Not Shikamaru. Not Sakura. Not Iruka-sensei. Nobody knows what it feels like to sit at that desk and hold the lives of tens of thousands of people in your hands. Nobody knows the terror of signing a piece of paper that might send good people to their deaths. But you do. Tsunade's breath hitched. She stared at the young man across from her, truly seeing the shadows beneath his eyes, the heavy set of his shoulders. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a war-weary leader, just like she was. If I have to be married to someone to save this village, Naruto said, his voice unwavering, I can't think of anyone I trust more than you. I trust you with my life, Tsunade. I always have. A tear slipped free from Tsunade's eye, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She didn't bother wiping it away. The sheer, terrifying sincerity in Naruto's eyes was disarming. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her as an equal. A partner in the truest sense of the word. You're an idiot, you know that? Tsunade whispered, her voice cracking. Yeah, well, I'm the idiot leading the village now, Naruto smiled faintly. He finally let go of her hand, reaching for the sake bottle. He poured them both a fresh cup. So, if we are going to do this, if we are going to play the daimyo's game and save Konoha, we do it on our terms. Tsunade sat up a little straighter, the haze of grief and alcohol receding as her analytical, shinobi mind began to re-engage. Our terms? A marriage of convenience, Naruto stated flatly. A political alliance for the public eye, and a partnership behind closed doors. We give the council their headlines, we secure the funding, and we protect the village. But they don't get to control our actual lives. Tsunade picked up her cup, eyeing him carefully. All right, Lord Seventh. Propose your terms. Naruto took a deep breath. Rule number 1. We live in the same house to satisfy the Umbu watchers and the gossips, but we have separate bedrooms. Separate private lives. I won't cross your boundaries, and you don't cross mine. Tsunade nodded slowly. The relief that washed over her was palpable. The fear of being forced into intimacy had been paralyzing her. Agreed. My private quarters are strictly off limits to you. Rule number 2, public affection is strictly performative. We hold hands at festivals, we smile for the cameras, we give the daimyo the show he paid for. But the second we are behind closed doors, the act drops. Agreed, Naruto said. Rule number 3. No pity. We don't apologize to each other for this. We're shinobi. We accepted a mission. We treat this like an S-rank, long-term undercover assignment. We respect each other as comrades. Tsunade felt a small, genuine smile tug at the corner of her lips. He really had grown up. The emotional maturity he was displaying was astounding. Agreed. And rule number 4. She leaned forward, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, familiar spark of fire. If either of us, and I mean either of us, finds a political loophole, a legal avenue, or enough financial backing to circumvent the daimyo's decree in the future, we take it. We annul the marriage immediately, and we walk away no questions asked. Naruto met her gaze firmly. Deal. If I find a way to free us, I swear on my life I will take it. Silence settled over the booth once more, but it was no longer the suffocating silence of despair. It was the charged, focused silence of two elite shinobi mapping out a battlefield. The monster of the village politics had backed them into a corner, but it had made a fatal miscalculation. It had assumed they would fight each other. Instead, it had just forced the two most stubborn, powerful individuals in the village to form an impenetrable alliance. Naruto raised his cup of cheap, foul-tasting sake. To the mission, Naruto said quietly. Tsunade looked at the cup, then up at the blond man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders with a begrudging grace. She felt a profound sense of sorrow for the life he was sacrificing, but also an undeniable, grounding comfort in knowing that she wouldn't have to carry her own burden alone anymore. She raised her cup, clinking it gently against his. The sound was sharp and clear over the hum of the tavern. To the mission, Tsunade echoed softly. They both drank, the bitter liquid burning their throats. As they set their cups down, the unspoken reality settled over them like a heavy blanket. Tomorrow, the announcement would be made. Tomorrow, the village would erupt in shock, the gossip would fly, and the agonizing theater of their new lives would begin. But tonight, in the dim light of the toad's belly, they were just Naruto and Tsunade. Two soldiers, bleeding for their village, making a silent pact to survive the storm together. Naruto stood up, leaving enough Ryo on the table to cover the drinks and then some. He looked down at Tsunade, offering her his hand. Come on, Naruto said gently. Let's go home. You look like hell, and I have a council meeting at dawn to tell Koharu and Hamura they won. Tsunade looked at his offered hand. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and placed her hand in his. He pulled her to her feet with ease. They walked out of the tavern together, stepping back into the torrential rain. As they walked side by side through the dark, flooded streets of the village they were sacrificing their lives to protect, the distance between them felt a little less insurmountable. It was a tragedy. It was a sacrifice. But as Tsunade glanced sideways at Naruto's determined profile, illuminated by the flashes of lightning in the sky, she realized that if she had to walk into hell, there was no one else she would rather have by her side. The dawn broke over Konohagakure not with a gentle, forgiving light, but with an intense, blinding brilliance that felt almost mocking. The sky was a flawless, crystalline blue, devoid of even a single wisp of cloud. It was a perfect day. A beautiful day. A day that the entire village, the land of fire, and the world at large had been eagerly anticipating for the past 3 weeks. It was the day of the Hokage's wedding, Naruto Uzumaki stood entirely motionless in the center of his bedroom in the Hokage residence. His arms were held stiffly out to his sides as three elderly, stern-faced tailors from the daimyo's personal retinue fussed around him. They tugged, pinned, and smoothed the layers of the traditional black Matsuki kimono he wore. The fabric was unimaginably heavy, woven from the finest silk imported from the capital, embroidered with the Uzumaki crest on the back and the kanji 4-7 subtly woven into the lining. "Breathe in, Lord Seventh," the head tailor murmured, pulling the rigid white obi sash impossibly tight around Naruto's waist. Naruto inhaled sharply, his ribs aching in protest as the heavy knot was secured at his back. He felt like he was being bound in a straitjacket, encased in a suffocating armor of tradition and political expectation. He stared blankly into the full-length mirror positioned in front of him. The man staring back was a stranger. His unruly blonde hair had been meticulously combed and plastered down with scented oils, taming the wild spikes into something resembling noble refinement. The whisker marks on his cheeks, usually a symbol of his boisterous, untamable spirit, looked stark and out of place against his unnaturally pale complexion. His bright blue eyes, the eyes that had once shone with an irrepressible dream, were flat. "Dead, that will be all," a low, familiar voice commanded from the doorway. The tailors ceased their fluttering, bowing deeply to Shikamaru Nara as he stepped into the room, before hastily exiting and closing the shoji door behind them. Shikamaru leaned against the wooden doorframe, a lit cigarette dangling from his lips. He was dressed in his formal, dark gray clan robes, looking every bit the noble advisor to the Hokage, but the dark circles under his eyes rivaled Naruto's, and the usual lazy slump of his shoulders was replaced by a rigid, uncomfortable tension. "They practically dress you in a coffin," Shikamaru observed dryly, exhaling a thin stream of smoke. "How does it feel?" "Like I'm suffocating," Naruto replied quietly, finally lowering his arms. He reached up, running a hand over the restrictive collar of the kimono. "Is the perimeter secure? Have the emissaries arrived at the shrine?" "Yeah," Shikamaru sighed, walking fully into the room and taking a seat on the edge of Naruto's perfectly made bed. "The entire village is shut down for the festival. Umbu squads are positioned on every rooftop within a 3-mile radius of the Senju Shrine. Lord Ikemoto and his cronies are already in the VIP pavilion, drinking premium tea and looking entirely too pleased with themselves. The daimyo himself sent a solid gold congratulatory plaque." Naruto scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "A gold plaque? How generous of him, considering he bought my life for the price of the village's operating budget." Shikamaru rubbed his temples, his jaw clenching. "Naruto, I ran the projections again last night. I looked for shell corporations, hidden tax routes, trade loopholes with the cloud and the sand. I spent 72 hours looking for a way to break the daimyo's hold over our infrastructure." Naruto turned away from the mirror, looking at his best friend. And nothing," Shikamaru whispered, the word laced with a profound, agonizing guilt. He looked down at his hands, his knuckles white. "I'm the smartest man in this village, Naruto. I'm your chief advisor. My entire job is to protect you from things like this. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't find a single viable alternative. If you don't walk down that aisle today, Konoha goes bankrupt in 28 days. The hospital closes in 30. The orphanage starves in 45. I failed you." Naruto's heart broke a little more at the sight of Shikamaru's bowed head. He closed the distance between them, placing a heavy, silk-clad hand on Shikamaru's shoulder. "You didn't fail me, Shikamaru," Naruto said firmly, pouring every ounce of the Hokage's authority into his voice. "We were outmaneuvered by a system that was built centuries before we were born. You did your job. You gave me the tactical reality, and you allowed me to make the choice. This is my choice. I am choosing to protect the leaf. By sacrificing yourself and Lady Tsunade," Shikamaru countered bitterly. "Shinobi are tools to be used for the village," Naruto quoted the ancient, brutal tenet with a sad smile. "Isn't that what the elders said? I used to hate that rule. I used to fight against it with everything I had. But maybe they were right, in a way. If I have to be a tool to keep the children of this village fed, then I'll be the sharpest, strongest tool they have." Naruto turned back to the window, looking out over the village. The sun was fully risen now, illuminating the colorful banners strung across the streets. He could hear the faint, echoing cheers of the civilian population gathering near the parade route. They were celebrating. They thought this was a grand romance, a fairy tale unification of the village's greatest heroes. "What time is it?" Naruto asked. "An hour until the procession," Shikamaru replied, standing up and crushing the cherry of his cigarette into a small ceramic tray. "Are you ready?" Naruto looked at the Hokage monument in the distance. He looked at the carved face of the fifth, and then at his own, set in stone right beside hers. "No," Naruto whispered. "But let's go anyway." Across the village, within the highly secure, pristine walls of the Konoha General Hospital's private executive suite, a very different kind of preparation was taking place. Tsunade Senju sat rigidly on a small wooden stool, staring blankly ahead. She was surrounded by a cloud of fragrant powder, the smell of jasmine and cherry blossoms thick in the air. "Hold still, Lady Tsunade. I just need to pin that Tsunokakushi," Shizen murmured, her voice trembling slightly as she held the traditional rectangular white silk headpiece. Tsunade didn't move. She felt as though her body belonged to someone else. She was draped in a shiromaku, the purest white, heavy silk wedding kimono. It was pristine, flawless, and suffocating. Historically, the white kimono symbolized the bride's purity, but also her death to her own family, and her rebirth into her husband's. To Tsunade, it felt like a burial shroud. "It's too tight," Tsunade rasped, her voice dry and unused. "I'm sorry," Shizen apologized instantly, her hands shaking as she adjusted the hidden pins in Tsunade's blonde hair. "I can loosen it." Not the hair, Shizen," Tsunade interrupted gently, raising a pale hand to touch the thick, embroidered collar of the shiromaku. "The chest. The collar. It feels like I can't breathe." Before Shizen could step forward to adjust the fabric, the sliding door to the suite slammed open with enough force to crack the wood. Sakura Haruno stormed into the room, her emerald eyes blazing with unshed tears and a fiery, unparalleled fury. She was dressed in a formal, deep crimson kimono, but she looked like she was ready to go to war. "Get out," Sakura barked at the two civilian makeup artists cowering in the corner. "Leave us." The women didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled past Sakura, bowing frantically, and fled down the hallway. Sakura slammed the door shut and engaged the chakra lock. She marched over to Tsunade, her chest heaving. She looked at her master, the legendary Sannin, the strongest kunoichi in the world, wrapped in white silk, looking paler and more fragile than Sakura had ever seen her. "Sakura," Tsunade began, offering a weak, tired smile. "You look beautiful." "Don't," Sakura choked out, the anger instantly dissolving into a sob. She dropped to her knees in front of Tsunade, uncaring that the rough floor was wrinkling her expensive silk kimono. She grabbed Tsunade's hands, holding them tightly. "Please, Lady Tsunade. You don't have to do this. I talked to Ino. I talked to Lee. We can mobilize. We can march on the capital. We can take the daimyo hostage until he rescinds the decree. We can fight them." Tsunade's heart ached at the fierce, blind loyalty of her apprentice. She reached out, freeing one hand to gently stroke Sakura's pink hair, just as she had done when Sakura was a 12-year-old girl desperately wanting to be strong. "Oh, Sakura," Tsunade murmured, her amber eyes softening with a profound, maternal sadness. "My brave, foolish girl. You would start a civil war for me?" In a heartbeat, Sakura fiercely declared, tears finally spilling over her cheeks and splashing onto Tsunade's white silk lap. "You saved me. You made me who I am. And Naruto, he's my best friend. They are destroying both of your lives. It's sick. He's a kid to you. You were in love with Dan. I know you still are. You can't just throw away your heart for a budget deficit." Shizen stood quietly in the corner, wiping her own eyes with a handkerchief, unable to speak. Tsunade let out a long, shuddering sigh. She looked past Sakura, catching her own reflection in the vanity mirror. The white silk, the pale makeup, the red paint on her lips. She looked exactly like she had when she was 25. A cruel trick of her own chakra mastery. "Sakura, look at me," Tsunade commanded, her voice regaining a fraction of its usual commanding timbre. Sakura sniffled, looking up, her green eyes wide and watery. If we attack the daimyo, we become rogue ninja, Tsunade explained slowly, as if teaching a final, agonizing lesson on shinobi politics. The other great nations will be forced to intervene to maintain the balance of power. The cloud and the rock will see our internal civil war as a weakness. They will invade. Thousands will die. The village that Hashirama built, the village that Jiraiya died for, the village that Naruto bled to save, it will burn to ash. But your happiness, my happiness died a long time ago, Sakura, Tsunade said, the brutal honesty cutting through the room like a scalpel. She saw Sakura flinch, but she continued. My life was over the day Dan died. I have been living on borrowed time ever since. I came back to this village to protect it. Naruto. Tsunade's voice softened slightly. Naruto is the closest thing I have left to a grandson. If I have to stand at an altar and put a ring on his finger so that he doesn't have to watch his village starve, then it is the easiest mission I have ever accepted. Sakura shook her head, burying her face in Tsunade's lap, sobbing openly now. It's not fair. It's just not fair. No, Tsunade agreed quietly, looking back at her reflection. She saw the ghost of Dan Kato standing behind her, his phantom hands resting on her white-clad shoulders, his smile sad but understanding. It rarely is. Tsunade gently pushed Sakura back, wiping the tears from her apprentice's face with her thumbs. Now dry your eyes. You are the head of the medical corps. You will stand by my side today, and you will hold your head high. We do not let the elders or the daimyo see us bleed. Understood? Sakura took a ragged breath, nodding slowly. She wiped her face, her shinobi training finally overriding her emotions. Understood, Lady Tsunade. Good, Tsunade said. She stood up, the heavy layers of the shiromuke settling around her like the walls of a prison cell. She turned to Shizen. Place the Tsunokakushi, Shizen. It's time to hide the horns of jealousy and become a proper, obedient wife. The bitter sarcasm in her tone made Shizen wince, but she stepped forward, carefully pinning the white silk hood over Tsunade's blonde hair. It framed her face, hiding her profile, restricting her vision. It was the final piece of the armor. Tsunade took one last look in the mirror. She locked away her grief, her rage, and her trauma deep within the recesses of her mind, sealing them behind a fortress of sheer, unbreakable willpower. Let's go, Tsunade said coldly. The crowd is waiting for their show. The Senju Shrine was located on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by ancient, towering cedar trees that had been planted by Hashirama himself. The courtyard had been transformed into an extravagant, opulent venue. Crimson carpets lined the stone pathways, and thousands of white paper lanterns hung from the branches, swaying gently in the warm morning breeze. Naruto stood in the waiting antechamber of the shrine, pacing like a caged tiger. The heavy silk of his Matsuki rustled with every step. Naruto-kun. Naruto stopped mid-stride, turning toward the open doorway facing the private gardens. Standing there, bathed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves, was Hinata Hyuga. She was breathtaking. She wore a pale lavender kimono embroidered with white lilies, her dark blue hair pinned up elegantly, with two strands framing her pale, aristocratic face. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. For a brief, agonizing second, Naruto's mind betrayed him. He saw a flash of an alternate universe, a universe where the daimyo hadn't intervened, where he had figured out his own heart, where she was the one walking down the aisle toward him, smiling that gentle, radiant smile. But the vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only the crushing reality of the heavy black silk binding his chest. Hinata, Naruto breathed, taking a step toward her. You look beautiful. Thank you, Naruto-kun, Hinata smiled softly. There was a profound, quiet grace about her. Over the past few years, she had grown from a stuttering, shy girl into a confident, powerful kunoichi and the poised heiress of her clan. She stepped into the room, her movements completely silent, and stopped a few feet away from him. She looked at his face, her pale Byakugan eyes seeing right through the stoic mask he was trying to wear. She saw the tension in his jaw, the shallow rhythm of his breathing, the deep, swirling vortex of sadness in his chakra network. I wanted to see you before the ceremony began, Hinata said gently, her voice like a soothing balm to his frayed nerves. She reached into the sleeve of her kimono and pulled out a small, beautifully embroidered omamori, a protective charm. It was a deep, vibrant orange, stitched with the uzumaki swirl and gold thread. She held it out to him. Naruto stared at the charm, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out and took it. His fingers brushed against hers, and he felt a sharp pang of regret. Hinata. Naruto swallowed hard, struggling to find the words. How did he apologize for a future they never even got the chance to explore? How did he explain that he was marrying a woman 40 years his senior to save the village, while breaking his own heart in the process? You don't need to say anything, Naruto-kun, Hinata interrupted softly, her smile never wavering, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I know. My father explained the political situation. Everyone who truly knows you, we understand. It feels wrong, Naruto confessed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, his eyes locked on the orange charm in his hand. I feel like I'm lying to everyone out there. I feel like I'm lying to myself. Hinata took a step closer, reaching up to gently rest a hand on his chest, right over his heart. You have the largest, most noble heart of anyone I have ever known, Hinata said, her voice filled with an unshakable conviction. You are sacrificing your own desires to protect the people you love. That isn't a lie, Naruto-kun. That is the truest, purest form of love there is. It is the will of fire. Naruto closed his eyes, leaning slightly into her touch, drawing strength from her unwavering support. I thought someday. I know, Hinata whispered, a single tear escaping and sliding down her cheek. I thought so too. But the village needs its Hokage. And Lady Tsunade needs a partner who is strong enough to carry the world with her. You are the only one who can do this. She pulled her hand back, taking a respectful step away. She bowed deeply, the perfect picture of noble grace. I wish you every happiness, Lord Seventh, Hinata said, her voice steady. May your union bring absolute peace to the leaf. Naruto clutched the charm tightly in his fist, bowing in return. Thank you, Hinata, for everything. Lord Seventh, an Umbu guard appeared in the doorway, kneeling respectfully. The bride has arrived. The elders are waiting. Naruto took a deep breath, his blue eyes hardening into ice. The boy who had dreamed of a happy ending was gone. Only the Hokage remained. Let's get this over with, Naruto said. The ceremony was a blur of excruciatingly slow, ancient rituals. Naruto stood at the altar of the shrine, feeling the eyes of thousands boring into his back. To his left sat the village elders, Koharu and Hamira, looking utterly triumphant. To his right, in the VIP pavilion, Lord Ikemoto lounged in his chair, fanning himself and looking like a cat that had swallowed the canary. Behind them, the ranks of the shinobi and the civilian nobles sat in rows of folding chairs, a sea of colorful silk and hushed whispers. And then, the traditional flutes and drums began to play, a slow, haunting melody that echoed through the cedar trees. The crowd parted. Tsunade walked down the crimson carpet, escorted by Sakura and Shizen. The crowd gasped in collective awe. The Shiromuka made her look ethereal, almost ghostly in her perfection. The white silk hood hid the fierce, familiar anger of the slug princess, replacing her with the demure, obedient image of a traditional bride. Naruto watched her approach, and a surge of profound anger boiled in his stomach. He hated the hood. He hated the heavy white silk. He hated that they had taken the most fiercely independent woman he knew and dressed her up like a sacrificial lamb for a political slaughter. Tsunade reached the altar, stepping up beside him. She didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead at the shrine's ancient wooden doors. The head priest, an elderly man in flowing purple robes, began the incantations. He droned on and on about the unification of the Senju and Uzumaki, the blessing of the kami, the eternal prosperity of the Leaf Village. Naruto tuned the words out. They meant nothing to him. Rule number 3, Naruto reminded himself, glancing at Tsunade's rigid profile. No pity. This is an S-rank mission. We will now commence the Sankudo, the priest announced. A shrine maiden approached, carrying a small, lacquered wooden tray bearing 3 flat sake cups of increasing size, and a ceremonial pitcher decorated with paper butterflies. This was the binding ritual. The sharing of sake. 3 sips from 3 cups, symbolizing the joining of the 2 families, the earthly flaws, and the heavenly blessings. The maiden poured the sake into the smallest cup and offered it to Naruto. He took it, brought it to his lips, and took 3 small sips. The sake was cold and sweet, a sharp contrast to the burning poison they had shared in the toad's belly just days ago. He handed the cup back. The maiden offered the same cup to Tsunade. Tsunade raised her hands, which were completely hidden by the long, white sleeves of her kimono. She took the cup. For a fraction of a second, as she brought it to her lips, she hesitated. Naruto saw her hands tremble. He saw the microscopic tightening of her jaw beneath the white hood. She was a hair's breadth away from throwing the cup at the elders and unleashing her chakra to decimate the shrine. Naruto shifted his weight, subtly moving his foot until the edge of his black shoe rested gently against the edge of her white sandal. A silent, grounding touch. "I'm here. We do this together." Tsunade paused. She felt the pressure against her foot. She took a microscopic breath, drank the 3 sips, and placed the cup back on the tray. The ritual continued with the medium cup, and then the large cup. With each sip, the invisible chains around them pulled tighter, locking them into a cage of gold and silk. When the final cup was placed back on the tray, the priest raised his hands. "Before the kami, and before the people of the Fire Country, I declare these 2 souls bound in eternal matrimony. You may present the Tamagotchi branch to the shrine." Naruto and Tsunade moved in perfect, robotic synchronization. They stepped forward, taking the sacred evergreen branches adorned with paper strips from the priest, and laid them on the altar. They bowed twice, clapped twice, and bowed once more. "Turn and face your village," the priest commanded. Naruto and Tsunade turned. The crowd erupted into deafening applause. Confetti and cherry blossom petals rained down from the sky, released by shinobi stationed in the trees. The flutes and drums played a triumphant, joyful song. Naruto forced the brightest, fakest smile he had ever mustered onto his face. He reached out and took Tsunade's hand. "Rule number 2, public affection is strictly performative." He squeezed her hand, holding it up for the crowd to see. Tsunade's hand was ice cold, stiff as a board in his grip. She tilted her head slightly, offering the crowd a polite, regal smile that did not reach her dead, amber eyes. "Long live the 7th!" The crowd chanted. "Long live Lady Tsunade!" Naruto looked toward the VIP pavilion. Lord Ikemoto was standing, applauding slowly, his serpentine smile stretching wide. He caught Naruto's eye and gave a small, mocking nod of approval. "Good boy," the nod seemed to say. "You know your place." Naruto's grip on Tsunade's hand tightened, almost painfully, but she didn't flinch. She just stood beside him, a ghost in white silk, watching her own funeral disguised as a celebration. The reception banquet was held in the grand courtyard of the Hokage Tower. It was an affair of sickening extravagance. Tables groaned under the weight of imported delicacies, fountains flowed with premium wine, and a small army of musicians played relentlessly. For 4 agonizing hours, Naruto and Tsunade played their parts flawlessly. They sat at the raised head table, the picture of unified strength. Tsunade had changed out of the heavy shiromaku into an irohachi cake, a vibrant, deeply colored overkimono embroidered with golden cranes and pine trees. The white hood was gone, revealing her face, but the stoic, impenetrable mask remained firmly in place. They accepted toasts from nobles they despised. They smiled for flashing cameras held by reporters from every great nation. They nodded graciously as Koharu and Hamura gave a lengthy, self-congratulatory speech about the wisdom of the village's leadership. "I am going to vomit," Tsunade murmured through a perfectly serene smile, waving gracefully at a passing group of merchants. "Don't do it on the gold cranes," Naruto replied out of the corner of his mouth, his own smile plastered onto his face like a physical deformity. "It would clash with the red silk." Tsunade let out a sharp, breathless sound that might have been a laugh if she wasn't so utterly miserable. "If Ikemoto comes over here for another toast, I am going to discreetly apply a chakra pulse to his central nervous system, and make him soil himself in front of the daimyo's court." "Please do," Naruto murmured, taking a sip of water. "I'll cover for you. I'll tell them it's a new Uzumaki clan tradition." It was a small exchange, a tiny sliver of their old, banter-filled dynamics slipping through the cracks of their performative nightmare. It didn't make the cage any less real, but it made the bars feel a little less cold. Eventually, The music shifted to a slow, melodic waltz. The crowd cleared the center of the courtyard, expectant eyes turning toward the head table. The first dance, Shikamaru announced, stepping up to the podium, his voice devoid of any real enthusiasm. Lord 7th. Lady Tsunade. Naruto stood up, offering his hand to Tsunade. She stared at it for a second, a flash of genuine panic crossing her eyes. Dancing required proximity. It required a physical intimacy that they hadn't negotiated in the toad's belly. We give them the show, Naruto's eyes promised silently. Tsunade took a breath, placed her hand in his, and allowed him to lead her down to the floor. Naruto placed his right hand firmly on the small of her back, resting over the thick, restrictive knot of her obi. Tsunade rested her left hand lightly on his shoulder. They stepped into the rhythm of the music. They moved gracefully, both possessing the immaculate physical control of elite shinobi, but there was an ocean of stiff, polite distance between them. Naruto kept his posture rigid, ensuring his chest did not brush against hers. Tsunade kept her chin tilted up, looking past his shoulder, avoiding his eyes entirely. "You're stepping like a wooden puppet," Tsunade whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. "I'm trying to be respectful of rule number 1, Naruto murmured back, spinning her gently. "I'm keeping my distance. We're supposed to look like we're in love, idiot," Tsunade hissed, hyper-aware of the hundreds of eyes analyzing their every movement. "If you hold me like I'm a live explosive, Ikemoto will know this is a sham. The daimyo wants a unified front." Naruto sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "Fine. Brace yourself." He slid his hand slightly higher on her back, pulling her an inch closer. It wasn't an embrace, but the forced proximity made the air between them suddenly thick and suffocating. Tsunade stiffened, her breath catching in her throat as she was forced to look at him. Up close, she could see the dark circles under his eyes, the tight lines of exhaustion around his mouth. She could smell the crisp, clean scent of the pine soap he used, mixed with the faint, metallic tang of the heavy silk he wore. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a broad-shouldered, powerful man. The sudden realization that this man was now legally, bindingly her husband sent a cold shockwave through her system. "How long until we can leave?" Tsunade asked, her voice trembling slightly. 30 minutes, Naruto promised softly, his blue eyes locking onto hers, seeing her panic and offering a grounding, steady anchor. "Just 30 more minutes of smiling, and then we go home. We can lock the doors, and the mission is over for the day." Tsunade nodded imperceptibly. She closed her eyes for a brief second, leaning just a fraction of an inch into his hold, drawing strength from his unwavering resolve. 30 minutes later, true to his word, Naruto signaled to Shikamaru. The Umbu guards moved in, forming a protective wedge, and escorted the happy couple through the cheering crowd, out of the Hokage Tower, and toward their new life. The estate was located in the most affluent, secluded district of Konoha. It was a massive, sprawling compound, hidden behind high stone walls and ancient oak trees. It had been constructed entirely out of the Fire Daimyo's pocket over the last few years, originally intended as a diplomatic residence, but swiftly repurposed and gifted to the Hokage as a wedding present. It was an architectural marvel. Traditional sloping roofs, sliding shoji doors made of the finest paper, wrap-around wooden verandas, and a private, meticulously manicured koi pond in the center courtyard. It was beautiful. It was a mausoleum. The heavy wooden gates slammed shut behind them, the iron latch dropping with a loud, echoing clank. The Umbu guards stationed inside bowed silently and melted away into the shadows of the trees, securing the perimeter. Naruto and Tsunade stood alone in the gravel driveway. The silence was absolute, deafening after the roar of the crowds and the relentless music of the banquet. The sky had turned a deep, bruised purple, the first stars beginning to prick through the twilight. They stood side by side, not touching, staring at the massive front doors of the estate. "Well," Naruto said, his voice sounding hollow in the quiet night. "We survived the battlefield." "Don't celebrate yet," Tsunade replied, wrapping her arms around her chest, suddenly feeling freezing cold despite the heavy layers of her Iroha cake. "The war is just starting." They walked up the stone steps in silence. Naruto pushed the heavy sliding doors open, stepping into the Grand entryway. He kicked off his formal black shoes, the sound echoing through the empty, cavernous house. Tsuande followed suit, slipping out of her white sandals. They walked down the polished wooden hallway, their socked feet making soft shushing sounds. The house smelled of fresh pine, expensive wax, and complete, utter emptiness. They reached the central living area, a massive room with tatami mats, a sunken hearth, and large glass doors looking out over the moonlit koi pond. Naruto stopped in the center of the room. He reached up, grasping the heavy white obi around his waist. He tugged violently on the knot, pulling it loose with a frustrated gasp. He shrugged off the outer layer of the black matsuki, letting it fall unceremoniously to the tatami floor in a pool of expensive silk. He stood there in his white underkimono, his chest heaving as he finally took a full, unconstricted breath. He ran his hands through his perfectly oiled hair, ruining the noble style, pulling the blonde strands back into their chaotic, familiar spikes. Tsuande watched him, her own breathing shallow. She raised her hands to the back of her head, her fingers fumbling with the intricate, heavy pins holding her hair and the golden ornaments in place. Her hands were shaking too badly to grip them properly. She let out a frustrated, angry sound, pulling too hard and wincing as a pin snagged her scalp. "Wait! Stop," Naruto said gently. He crossed the room, stopping an arm's length away from her. "Turn around." Tsuande hesitated, her pride flaring, but the dull ache in her scalp won out. She turned her back to him. Naruto raised his hands. His fingers, calloused from years of kunai throwing and Rasengan forming, were surprisingly gentle. He found the pins buried in the thick, blonde twists of her hair. He carefully extracted them, one by one, placing them on a nearby wooden table. He unwound the golden threads, untied the heavy crimson ribbon, and let the intricate hairstyle fall apart. Tsunade's blonde hair cascaded down her back in a thick, wavy waterfall, falling past her waist. She let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief as the heavy weight was lifted from her head. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," Naruto replied softly. He stepped back, instantly re-establishing the physical boundary between them. Tsunade turned back around. She looked at him, standing in his white underrobes, his blue eyes tired and heavy. She looked around the massive, silent room. The reality of their situation crashed over her with the force of a tidal wave. They were married. They were legally, financially, and politically bound to each other until death. They were standing in a house they didn't ask for, paid for by a man they despised, playing a game they never wanted to enter. The awkwardness was thick, suffocating, and terrifying. It wasn't the awkwardness of strangers on a blind date. It was the infinitely worse awkwardness of two people who knew each other intimately as comrades, now forced into a dynamic that felt deeply unnatural and wrong. So, Tsunade cleared her throat, crossing her arms again defensively. The layout. Naruto cleared his throat, looking away, staring intently at the sliding glass doors. "Right. Shikamaru gave me the blueprints yesterday. The estate is split into two wings. The east wing has a master suite, a private study, and access to the hot springs. The west wing has an identical master suite, a library, and a balcony overlooking the gardens." "I'll take the west wing," Tsunade said immediately. "I prefer the library to a study." "Done," Naruto said, his voice flat. "The kitchen, dining room, and this living area are neutral ground. We share those." "Understood." Silence descended again. A thick, unbearable silence. Rule number 1. Separate bedrooms. Separate private lives. Naruto started, shifting his weight uncomfortably. He looked at the floor. "I have a massive stack of budget reviews to look over tomorrow. I'm going to take the files into my room and get some sleep. It's been a long day." Tsunade nodded stiffly. "Yes. I am going to shower. It will take me an hour to wash this makeup and powder off my skin." "Right." Naruto nodded, taking a step backward toward the hallway leading to the east wing. He hesitated, looking back at her. She stood in the center of the massive room, draped in heavy red silk, her blonde hair wild, looking incredibly beautiful, incredibly powerful, and incredibly lonely. He wanted to say something. He wanted to offer comfort. He wanted to tell her that they would find a way out of this, that he wouldn't let the village destroy her entirely. But the words felt cheap and hollow in the face of the massive, gilded cage surrounding them. "Good night, Tsunade," Naruto said softly, using her name without honorifics, a quiet reminder of their partnership. Tsunade looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting the cold moonlight from the courtyard. "Good night, Naruto," she replied. Naruto turned and walked away, his white socks silent on the wooden floor. Tsunade listened to the faint slide of his bedroom door opening, and the soft click of it sliding shut. She was entirely alone in the massive living room. Tsunade reached up, gripping the collar of the heavy red Iroha cake. She shucked it off her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor to join Naruto's black coat. She stood there in her own white underkimono, shivering in the cool night air. She walked slowly toward the west wing, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. She found the master suite, stepped inside, and closed the heavy shoji door behind her. On the other side of the estate, in the east wing, Naruto lay fully clothed on top of the massive, pristine bed. He stared blankly at the unfamiliar wooden ceiling, the orange omamori from Hinata resting heavily over his heart. In the west wing, Tsunade sat on the edge of her own massive bed, staring at the floor, the silence of the house pressing against her eardrums like a physical weight. They were married. They were heroes. They had saved the village, and as the moon rose high over the gilded cage of their new estate, the 7th and 5th Hokage lay awake in the dark on opposite sides of the house, feeling more profoundly, devastatingly alone than they ever had in their entire lives.